So today we're going to talk about the last section of your paper that you're going to be writing, okay? And that section is the conclusion. This is where you're going to get to talk about, did you answer your question? Was it the answer you expected? What would happen if you had done things differently? Okay? As well as, and it's also where you're going to talk about, did your experiment lead to any other questions? And it must, even if it doesn't, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at that PPDAC cycle and look at those notes. And there is another resource on your Onenote that we want to talk about as well. Because Mr. Kavanaugh, during the holidays, wrote an exemplar for this particular section. So we'll be talking about that and looking at how that is written up. It's slightly different from the PPDAC, but it's the same type of information. And you'll see that it's organized, like I told you, with headings, etc. Okay? So let's just go straight to the Onenote. Okay, so we've talked about our problem, our plan, collecting the data, showing your graphs. We talked about analysis, shape, etc. So today we're going to just talk about the conclusion. So in this section, you're going to discuss what the experiment has shown. My experiment has shown that students do not remember more if they play music when they study. Whatever, right? Keep it short and sweet. We'll look at examples in just a moment. Then you're going to reflect on it. If was that consistent with what you expected, right? I hypothesized that, whatever. I was not correct in my assumption. And make sure that when you're talking about that, you're very specific. You basically need to restate the question when you do that, right? So here we go. And then something about what it was you were measuring to make sure. Sampling variability, you need to always say something about it. And we'll look at the way he puts it, and you're going to have that as a template to write your paper, right? It won't tell you exactly the same data values, but it'll give you a good, strong idea of what types of things we're going to look at. If you replicate what he wrote in your paper using your data, and you don't get carried away, right? Remember, that's the biggest problem is most students get carried away and say too much. Don't say too much. Then you'll be in great shape. All right? So I recognize that a different sample would get different results. If you don't have something about that in your conclusion, then you cannot even get an achieved. Okay? You have to recognize that statistics has its liabilities. The data that you get is only as good as the sample you take. Right? And if you do different samples. Then you have to reflect on your investigation and discuss any limitations. Did the girls the girls couldn't get the girls to pay attention? They were all working on their laptops. Surely that never happened to anybody in here. Okay. All right. And what you could have done to address that. You would have talked about that in another section as well. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to go through and look at Mr. Kavanaugh's exemplar, and again, you have this in your OneNote. So we've been building a template. So you might want to look at his and build a template and highlight portions where you think you would be changing things, and look at the things that you would not be changing based on his template. Okay. So first thing, remember I told you I wanted them very clearly defined. Here you go. Your purpose. And then you can use the fixed terminology that we use in the PPDAC. That's fine. You don't have to change it to his. He's dealing with much more free, less restricted way. My short-term memory is terrible. I find that I forget new information, especially lists very quickly. So he's talking about why would you be interested in this, right? We talked about that. You don't have to put it in just this way, but it's fine. But you need to talk about why. Remember that? Okay, the reason I'm doing this, so there's your why. Then your question, he put it as an entirely separate section. That's nice because I can look right there, read your question, see if it's okay. Right? Then, remember I told you that I want you to title each section so that I know what I'm looking at. Then we talked about research. Then he does his research. Notice there's no fancy references. You will need a reference of some sort, but you can just put in the website you got it from, whatever. It doesn't have to be some fancy notation. You have to have a hypothesis, right? This is what I think is going to happen. We talked about that. Then a new section about the plan. You talk about what's going to happen. We talked about that. You need to describe what it is you're going to do. Then, how you're going to do it. These are the instructions you would give your students in that other list. Same thing. Just what is it you're going to be doing? Be very detailed. I should be able to read this and know exactly what happened when you went into that room. Well, not what happened, but what you planned to happen. Okay? So don't leave things out thinking, oh, well, you're going to know that. That's not good enough. So you'll have 2 tests, remember, and you put immediately after test 1, so make sure that you give something about that. Then related variables, remember this is where we were talking about things that could happen that you need to mitigate for. These are things that you think about ahead of time, right? This is part of your plan. This is not after you've done it. This is not an observation of what happened. That's going to come later. Instead, these are things that you need to think of. So as you're working in your group, you might think, we need to make sure they all have their laptops closed or whatever you need to do. Okay, so you can see he's got several different things here. Some of these can be simply copied and pasted right into your own paper, right? Students telling each other the answers is going to be an issue for every single one of your experiments, right? So how can you control that? Just copy and paste it. Okay, so some of them will. Then we talked about the analysis. That's what we did last time. The difference in the number of objects, they talked about that. What's that called, the difference in the number of objects, remembered? The range, right? Remember we talked about it in more formal terms. And it talks about what each thing means. Remember you have to have that chart with your actual raw data in it. He didn't put any raw data in this one, but there you go. We didn't have a difference column, but that's not a bad thing to have. Doesn't have to have it, but it wouldn't be a bad thing. Okay? And then a section on the analysis. This is where your graphs go. Sorry. See that he's got the box and whisker plot with the dot plot we talked about. He talked about outliers. Not always going to have some, but if you do, you need to talk about them. This might be a good heading to have. You can just put outliers, and if there are none, you need to just simply say, I recognize that there aren't any, right? But if there are, you need to deal with it here. Need to decide if you're going to clean your data. So did one student, we talked about that, did one student remember 20 words the first time when there were only 15 words, right? Then that data has to be thrown out. Talked about that, okay? Then measures of center. Remember we talked about that in the analysis. Measures of center are critical. And the most important one is the median. So talk about the median. You can talk about the mean. It's a little less important. The mode is very important. So those are your 3 measures of central tendency, the measures of center. So think about those. Shape and spread. Talk about the shape and spread. Now look at this one. This one is way off here has one piece of data that's way off to the left, but all the others seem to be pretty bunched together. What would that mean if I have a tail that's way off to the left? What is that called? Skewed left, right? So this data is slightly skewed left. If you remove those 2 data points, then you'd see that this makes like a perfect rectangle, doesn't it? So this is basically rectangular, but slightly skewed to the left. Okay? Do you agree with that? See the rectangle right there. Okay? Talk about the range. Remember we talked about that. You need to talk about range. What is the differences between the two things? And talk about how many improved, how many went down, how many didn't change. Numbers. Put the numbers in there. So you'll see exactly like he did. Put the numbers in there. He's also talking a little bit about why those numbers came out the way they did. Why are people improving? Why are they not improving, etc. Okay, so it's very similar to what we've done. It's just a little more, it's just you have a firm grasp on how the layout should look, right? If you do what he's done, then I can just put a big E on your paper and go on, right? Okay, just make sure that in your copy and paste, you do not get carried away and use his numbers. If I see his numbers on there, then I'm going to have to assume you don't know what you're talking about, and that's going to hurt you, right? So be very careful. That's probably the only bad thing about using something like this. And here he's talking about the conclusion, talking about the results of the treatment, and in this case, it did not agree with what he thought was going to happen, and it did not agree with the research, and that's perfectly fine. You don't have to make sure that your results follow what the research says. You just have to make sure that you talk about it and that you understand what could be happening here, okay? So this results make me think that the students have improved the number of objects they remembered because they developed some memory strategy. In other words, they knew that they were going to be asked to do the same task the second time. If you know something is going to happen or you don't know it's going to happen, which one do you think you're going to do better on? Right? You're going to have if you're doing the same thing twice, then the second time you should get better, even if there are other circumstances going on. Right? So talk about that. Here's that section on related variables. So to get better results, talking about what happened, several variables would need to be changed or controlled to ensure that the memory techniques could not be used. Okay? So you could reduce the time they have in the second trial. Right? Don't give them as much time if they've had some practice. Then, well, that's the same thing I just said. The number of objects could be increased to account for the fact that they know what they're doing. Right? Talk about what you could do to fix whatever problem you found. Okay? And if your problem is exactly like his, that's fine. It's the same type of experiment, isn't it? So, just depending on what topic you're looking at, but make sure you're talking about your experiments. Limitations and further things. The results are limited to the application for a number of reasons. He's getting a little wordy here, but that's okay. But remember that we have some limitations. One big limitation is we're only going to be talking about girls. There are more than girls out there, right? Yes. Yes, you may. Okay? And then why or who could find this useful? Okay? I think he went on a limb, but I like it. The results can be used for police in understanding the accuracy of witness memory after seeing a crime or a criminal, right? How many times have you heard that eyewitness accounts are really, really bad? We remember what we want to remember or create things. So why? Who could use this information? Remember, that's always going to be part of your conclusion. Who can use it? All right? So utilize the OneNote, the PBDAC, to be able to pull that information, but this is how you're going to lay it out. Okay? So we've been copying and pasting and creating a Word document. My advice would be to copy and paste his new document to replace that, but would still keep your other one because you've been looking at how you want to organize those things, but this is a little bit more organized in my opinion because of the titling and everything that I told you to do. Okay? So, do you have to be exactly the same as his? No. But make sure that you're mentioning those types of things. And remember I told you I wanted in the analysis 3 things about, and there they are. Shape and the spread. He's put a little bit more in there, but let's go with his number. Okay? Yes?
Should we use first-person pronouns when talking about stuff like this, or should we do it as a group?
Remember, each individual, you're going to turn in a paper on your own. So when you're talking about the plan, you can talk about we. That's fine. But when you're talking about the analysis, it needs to be I. Yeah, this is what I found. Because remember, you'll be working in your group when you come up with your initial question. You'll be working in your group when you do your planning. You'll be working in the group when you actually perform the experiment. But then when you come back to write it up, you will be working on your own. Remember, you'll have 1 week. So we'll start it on a Monday. Whatever. Well, we'll look at the classes and see. We may give you the information on a Friday, just depending on how the schedule runs that week. But we'll give you the information as soon as during the first period we can. Then you'll have that entire week. You'll have 1 week to complete it. So that may or may not stretch out over a weekend period. Now that includes you have to go to a class. So you might want to think about the timetabling. We'll look at the calendar and see. We'll see which week that is, so that you can talk about finding some teachers, because you need to let them know as quickly as you can. So if we can get that nailed down today, that would be good. So we'll look at the calendar to make sure that you see when this is going to happen. We'll just go ahead and pick a date, and that's when it's going to happen. And that way you can go and talk to instructors. We'll use some of the time today if you want to go and do that. Also, you need to think about who your group is going to be. I need all that information as well. Okay? All right, so let's just talk about those and look at the scheduling and see how that's going to go.